Well, hello and welcome to Improving Your Dating Radar. I'm here with the wonderful Sandy Weiner from lastfirstdate.com. Hi, Sandy.
Hi, Roberta.
And I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler from forrelationshiphelp.com. And as I said, Sandy's from lastfirstdate.com. Doesn't that sound great? Like you're just not going to have to do it again. So we're here to discuss, at least for 5 shows, 5 really important things that help you in your dating scene, especially if you're over 40. And of course, it helps everybody in the dating scene. And the big thing we want to talk about today is being controlling as a red flag when you're dating, or whether you're being controlled, which is another red flag as you're dating. Right, Sandy?
Oh, yeah. And those are really bad red flags. Really bad. It's amazing how many people ignore them, even though they know in their gut that something's really off. And in fact, I met somebody this weekend. I was away at a conference, and he said, I've always wanted to get married and have children. And I'm not sure about my girlfriend. There's a few things that I'm not really sure are going to work out. Hey, Michael. And I said, well, do you want to talk to me about them? And the one thing he mentioned right away was like, bing, bing, bing. he said, every week for about 18 hours, she gets into a really horrible mood and she won't talk to me.
Oh, the silent treatment.
Silent treatment. So there were a lot of things like that with communication where she was pushing him away, getting outraged over things that he had done, but not talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Had to be her way or the highway. He's also an introvert, and he'd say, I need some space. And she would say, you don't love me, not honoring his
On
needs.
after you. Yeah.
So it was just like, ah!
Lots of red flags.
Lots of big red flags and she's really hijacking the relationship when she acts that way. So do you want to start with like some of that
Sure.
stonewalling communication stuff? Because that's
Yeah,
a
let me just
biggie.
talk a minute about the wonderful entry point that you just gave me, because my work is, I specialize, I'm a relationship educator and consultant, but I specialize in working with the partners, the exes, the adult children, and the co-workers of what I call chronically difficult people. And I trademarked a term for those, Sandy, that you just started to use, and that term is hijackals. And I'll give you a definition of a hijackal because it relates directly to the control issue. Hijackals are people who hijack relationships for their own purposes while relentlessly scavenging them for power, status, and control. And what you were just describing in that situation is the relentlessness for her own purposes, because she was feeling abandoned or fearful when he wasn't talking to her. And he learned how to go into a place to at least be there and present for her, but that wasn't enough for her, and she couldn't be respectful and honoring. So she is endeavoring to control the relationship by her fear of being left, which is a really interesting piece. And hijackals come in all forms and all shapes and sizes, and they're about 10-12% of the population. But there are things like I've written in my books. I have a passive aggressive edition of the hijackal trap, because people who are passive aggressive will definitely demonstrate these behaviors, and they control in different ways. Each kind of hijackal controls in different ways. But your client is talking about somebody who is needy and wants to have control over the relationship by, won't you take care of my needs first? Won't you look after me? It's very one-sided and very fearful, as you said. And whether you're being controlled or you're being the controlling one, both of those are pathways to loneliness. And I just wrote a blog post about that on For Relationship Help. So if people need something further to read, that's there. But whenever we're striving for control in the relationship or control of the relationship, we're not going to be able to engage in a healthy relationship and set it up to be healthy. And so when it happens in the dating scene, antennae need to go up, because it says there's not going to be equitability here. And you don't get into a relationship to parent somebody or be parented by them, which is what control often looks like. You get into a relationship to partner and be partnered. And there's a huge distinction there, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. So nothing will build resentment more than for somebody to parent their partner. I'll tell you how it is. Have you done that? Did you turn off the lights? Did you remember to call so-and-so? You know, constantly not treating you like an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And that begins to seep into the dating world. You know, first of all, we're in this wonderful chemical haze of, you know, everybody's so wonderful and it's all sweetness and light and everybody's on their best behavior. And hijackals are the ultimate chameleon. They will make it so that you think they are exactly what you want. And then slowly the cracks begin to show in the foundation. And when you call attention to them, they backtrack like crazy. They apologize abjectly. And then you give them another chance, because after all, you're a reasonable human being. So what do you think, Sandy, is a key for people to notice in the early dating life, that something may be going down the rabbit hole of control?
Well, I think that when you bring up something like a hurt feeling and the person gets defensive, that's a big sign that the person, it makes it about them and can't really take you in. So that, to me, you know, I kind of recognize that a lot in my earlier years, the defensiveness, the backpedaling, you know, not telling the truth, but then when called on it, you know, making something up. Oh, I didn't really mean that. And you and I talked about this on my radio show. Rhoberta was on my radio show, First Date Radio. And we talked about Donald Trump as a backpedaler, a person who says one thing and says, oh, I didn't really mean that. Right? So
yeah,
it's
the highest order.
Yes, exactly. So I think, you know, that you need to be able to really communicate your feelings and feel safe, that the person can hear you, that they can honor you.
Mm-hmm. And that they want to hear you.
Yes. And not necessarily agree with you. And I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that people think, oh, well, I have to agree with them. And no, we're all allowed to have different opinions, but we do need to hear each other. So a person,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that we all have the inalienable right, and I do a webinar series on inalienable rights. And the first inalienable right is that we deserve to be here, to take up space and breathe. That we actually deserve to own our space that we're standing on. And that we're allowed to speak about what we think and what we feel and what we need and what we want. That's
Correct.
just assertive. When I start talking about you, I've overstepped the boundary. So I think what you're speaking about is, if a person can't hear you when you are assertive, or you make a request, or you even broach a topic, and they go scurrying back to defensiveness, offensiveness, right? Then that is a big red flag. Like you say, they don't hear you, they become defensive, they maybe be offensive. You know, why are you picking on me? Nobody was picking on you. I was way over here saying I preferred something. But they're telling you by what they hear and what they pick up that they're really not ready to be in an equitable partnership.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you bring up hurt feelings, if you bring up, you know, if the person keeps showing up late and that bothers you, and you say something, that's a big one in dating. And you say something and they say, well, you know, I have things to do. My time's important. It's like you just got slapped in the face and negated. So, so they're hijacking that conversation, and you don't matter.
Right.
I
And
had
and
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say, so I had a guy who I was dating, and I had a crisis, and he didn't show up in a crisis, and that was really important to me.
Oh yeah.
And I said something to him on the next date. He made up an excuse. My iPhone was stolen. But there's lots of ways to call people. If you know that somebody's in crisis, even if your iPhone gets stolen, you can find a way to actually borrow somebody's phone, get on a landline. Like, I don't know, people smoke signals. There's so many ways to let somebody know you're thinking of them. So it's like when you start making excuses when there should be no excuses, that's not okay. And so I sat down with him and I said, "Listen, my life is not all unicorns and roses. It's actually full of ups and downs and complexities. And if you can't handle that, that's fine. I just can't be in your life." Um,
Yeah.
right? So it was pretty
Yeah.
clear.
But you have boundaries, which
I
is something
do.
that many people have not had practice in putting out there. They're not clear about their boundaries. They don't know how to speak them in a way that they would feel comfortable, and then they don't know how to maintain them. But
Right.
you just did that so beautifully, Sandy, which is, it's fine with me. I'm only speaking about myself, but I do have things that happen in my life, and I do want to be with someone who's responsive. And, if this is a pattern, it won't work for me, but we can talk about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so how we speak to each other matters. So when we were talking before about the defensiveness, so how you bring up the issue also matters. Using I statements, not you're a horrible person, you always come late. Using all those absolutes just makes people feel defended. It makes them feel defensive. So it's our responsibility to show up and use the language that connects instead of just throws the issue into the other person's lap. And
Mm-hmm.
when we've shown up responsibly and said, when you did this, I felt this. Then if the person becomes defended, that's not your problem anymore. So I think we have to both take responsibility, but a lot of people really don't know how to even bring up the issue, or
Mm-hmm.
they hold it in and then they implode. So in this case that I was describing in the beginning of this blab, the man was saying what happens to him is he wants to fix things, and he is a people pleaser. So he feels completely emasculated. He feels helpless, and it affects him deeply. But then he doesn't make a big deal because he wants her in his life. And so the cost is great. The cost is really great to him.
And it's cumulative over time. The longer
Yes,
that he puts up with it, he's teaching her it's all right to treat him that way. And pretty soon he has no defense to come to her and say, I don't like this. He
right.
doesn't feel like he can because he's let it go so long.
So what would you suggest in a case like that where they've been in a relationship for 2 years
Oh.
and he would like to get married one day, and he's kind of holding on to this relationship, I think, because he feels there's no one else. I think he has that scarcity approach. But is there a way for him to now bring this up since he's tolerated it for so long?
Yes, yes, there is. And it's important, if not imperative, for him to do it, because this is a pattern that they've developed, and he's accommodating her, but she is not open to making accommodations for him.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want that to be happening. So I would suggest that he say something in using this way of speaking, which you brought up the word I messages. And for a long time I was a trainer in all kinds of businesses and education systems and things, and iMessages were a big deal, and I never felt comfortable with them. I don't think they're a good idea.
Mm,
And so I developed another system, which I write about in my book, Kaizen for Couples. So I'm going to just share that formula with you,
great.
which is because we have an inalienable right to be here, to show up, to take up space and draw breath. and I hope we accord ourselves that, then we have the right to speak about ourselves. And the technique that I developed is called a personal weather report. It means I am the expert on what's going on inside this, and I can report about it. I do not talk about the other person. That's where I don't like the I message.
Mm.
So I would suggest that your client say something like this. I find that I have been really, really affected by my feeling of not being heard. And that doesn't feel good to me at all. And I really need to speak up. I realize I really need to speak up about this. Mutual respect and mutual ability and willingness to listen is a really important thing for me. And I find I don't feel heard when I ask for time or space. And I need to find a solution to this. Can we talk about it? So he hasn't put any blame on her. He's taken it all on what's going on within me. You know, I realize I've let it go a few times, and I just get more turmoil, and I've got to bring it up now. So he owns the whole process. He's not blaming her. If she hears it as blame, that just gives you more information that she has bigger issues, and he's absolutely in the right ballpark for finding out whether he wants to spend another 2 years with this person. But at least he puts his cards on the table in an honest and kind way. And there are 2-word phrases in the English language I would like to eradicate completely, Sandy, and that is brutal honesty. I don't believe we ever need to be in that category. The genius of good communication, John Powell wrote years ago, is to be totally kind and totally honest at the same time. So when you use a personal weather report, you are just speaking about what's going on within you. There's no you in it at all. You do not talk about anybody else. There's no finger pointing. There's not when you do this or, you know, any of that. It's just, here's where I'm at. So I would certainly suggest that he get some affirmative communication like that. And he might want to read Kaizen for Couples. That's Kaizen for Couples, because there's 2 chapters on that in there. And it's simple, but it's not easy to do because we don't often accord ourselves the right to actually stop and know what's going on within us. And so because of that time lag where we don't stop and figure it out, and we're always like in the relationship, we tend to let things go because we don't catch up with them. And this is a moment to say, no, I'm going to catch up with myself and this thing that's happening. And I'm going to say, it hurts, it bothers me, I want it to be different. And that's on him. You know, he's got to take that initiative and he's got to step up. And if he does it in that very kind and honest way of the personal weather report, then he is at least putting the cards on the table in an absolutely egalitarian way.
Yeah. And it's so important to not talk about any accusations about the other person. It's really what's going on for you. And most people have a hard time knowing what that is. I find that in my work, the first part of this whole process is is really getting clear with what it is that's happening inside. What value of yours feels like it's being stepped on. Because when you are a people pleaser, like this person is and so many people are, you're accommodating somebody else by usually giving up on something really important for you. And that takes a toll over time. I see that Mike has a question. It's actually, Mike, if you can be a little more clear about what your challenge is with dating with a disability. What challenges have you had? So if you can just be a little more clear about that, because the way that you stated, it's hard to answer that for you.
Yeah, and just something further while Mike is gathering his thoughts there. For somebody to take responsibility for the relationship at the moment by saying where they are, right, is is often a real act of the first act of courage for them in changing the dynamic of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have something like the personal weather report, where you're not going to blame, you're not going to point a finger, you're not going to ask people to explain themselves, you go first and say, here's what's going on within me.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the opportunity to see what the other person is capable of doing with it. Like in your example, that woman might say, well, that's great, but I have needs too, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, alert,
Right.
not willing to listen to me. I have explained to her why it's important and why I want to share this. I've increased my transparency and my vulnerability. I've taken a risk here. And then she goes back to allaboutme.com. Okay, I don't have to know any more than that to say, would that be the way I'd like to have the rest of my life go?
Right.
And, you know, I'm sorry for your client that he's invested 2 years and he's done all of this, but every relationship is a wonderful growing medium if you view it that way. And 2 years invested in finding out that you don't want to continue living with someone who discounts you, not a terrible investment. And let me say something too about people pleasing, because it's come up a couple of times. Let's all remember that we, as human being babies, all learn to be people pleasers. That's how we start out, because we have to keep those giants happy so they'll feed us and change us and not abandon us.
Mm-hmm.
So we are all people pleasers at that degree. And it's part of the maturation process of not just becoming an adult, which for me is a growth process. You know, you're a baby, a toddler, a preschooler, elementary school, high school, college, you just got bigger. But to become an emotional grown-up, that's where we're talking now. That this development needed to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And so by your client recognizing that, okay, people pleasing may be my style, but that's not a mature approach. That's not a growing up approach if I want to have an equal partnership.
Right.
So let me do my own work first. That's what I always tell folks who come to see me. They'll come and they'll say, I'm with a hijackal, it's awful, it's terrible. Yeah, okay, I get all that. Let's get that out of the way. And then let's find out why you're hijackal bait. Because it starts within you. When you start to recognize things about yourself and that comes to the surface, and then you can verbalize it, then you can ask for what you need and want. You can see if it's available to you, if there's willingness. Then you begin to get all the juice you can out of the relationship, all the learning about yourself, practicing, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, watching what happens. Then and only then can you actually, unless there's physical abuse or sexual abuse going on, can you make a truly grown up decision whether to stay in the relationship or leave it.
Right. And so these, very well said. And I think that what happens is people love to point a finger and say, I can't believe that person did this to me. By the way, just to clarify, this guy is not a client. He's just somebody I met who started to open up to me about his relationship. And it's so I don't know his whole personality. I don't know everything about him, but I did say these were really big red flags, and that the relationship is in major trouble. And that I would not marry a person in this state. Whether it can be worked on is a different story. But when you have the biggest, most difficult people in your life, you can learn the most from those people. The point is that it's a learning opportunity, and a lot of people don't learn; they just keep repeating.
Or they run. They run.
Yes. And I just went to a conference on difficult clients last week. And so she talked about when somebody really challenges you, where do you feel it in your body? And I thought that was a great question, because when something happens and you feel really icky about it, there's a physical response. And so do you feel it in your gut? Do you feel it in your solar plexus, in your neck or your shoulders? And then you recognize that feeling. And she also brought up the wounds that we have from our childhood that get triggered when those difficult people come into our lives. So it's waking up something in you. So that's the only person you can control. And I think we forget that.
Yeah.
And so when you do take control over your own emotions and you say, what am I feeling? What's going on inside? Like we talked about before. And then you go, okay, that's getting triggered. Okay, how am I going to deal with this now? And so, when you do talk to that person and you notice what's going on for them, because a lot of times, I don't know how you feel about this, Rhoberta, but if you notice that somebody's really agitated and, we're talking about clients now, but any difficult person, if somebody comes to, in a dating situation, one of my clients said with her old relationship that just ended, she used to come over and he would be in a terrible mood a lot and not talk about it. So it's the same kind of situation that I brought up earlier. And she would feel like that she was responsible to help him and he wouldn't let her in. And so, she could tell him how she feels. She could say, when I'm noticing that that you're in a really bad mood. And can she say, this is how it affects me when you're in a mood like this and you don't talk? I mean, how, to talk, because what happens is the door was shut, it's like, boom, you're out.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of complex stuff that we're talking about right here. And the people-pleasing piece, being a point of maturation, is very important. So if somebody is having that problem, they need to work that through. If you happen to have been raised by a hijackal, or you have become, that has become part of what you believe is normal, and you may hate it, but you believe it's normal. So like for me, for instance, I was raised by a hijackal mother. She was not well at all. She spent time in a mental institution while I was small, and she came back, and when she came home, she was a fully fledged hijackal. And if you're wondering how to spot them, I have a free ebook for you at hijackals.com called How to Spot a Hijackal, and that'll help you. But our upbringing, whoever's been in our upbringing, will have influenced us when we were people pleasing because we needed to keep those people happy so they'll feed us. And they were teaching us what life was like and what life was all about and how to get people to like us. And so there's a tremendous amount of impact and imprint that happened to us before we had rational linear thought. Our brains don't develop completely until we're 25 years old, and some people don't realize that. And the greatest brain growth is from 0 to 5 years old, which is when we don't have language. So we're taking things in through our sight and sound and touch and hearing and smelling. And we're making sense of the world by looking at people's facial expressions or hearing their tone of voice and all. We don't know what those words mean. and so we have to understand that sometimes that stuff was imprinted in us very early on. So to go back to the person that you were speaking of, both of them, for the person who's a people pleaser and hasn't individuated beyond that, it's work that they need to do before they can even address what's going on in the relationship. Like before that person even knows what to say to the woman who's not taking any account of what he needs or wants, he needs to recognize that maybe he doesn't take into account what he needs or wants either. So he has his own work to do. And it's always wise to do your own work first. Because if you don't do your own work, you project your greatest fears of who you are onto other people and say, you're like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's really true. And I can tell you that for my own growth as a person coming out of divorce, that I had been bend myself into a pretzel person during my marriage, to try and keep the peace, and that my whole evolution was to find what my needs were, really honor myself, really value myself. And my whole thing is be a woman of value, to be a person of value. So actually would like to speak to Mike, who's talking about being in a wheelchair and that people don't take him seriously, and they speak to the wheelchair and not to him. Yeah, so Roberta's saying that she understands, and I understand as well. And I think it goes back to the same thing that we were talking about, that you have to take yourself seriously, that you, like Rhoberta said, are you taking yourself too lightly? Once we really understand who we are and value ourselves, it radiates out to everybody else. I had a client who had cerebral palsy. Actually, she's not in a wheelchair, but she walked with a severe limp, and she had some deformities in her hands. And when she first started dating after divorce, she would keep her hands under the table, and she always thought she was being rejected because of her cerebral palsy. And I worked with her on her value, on valuing herself. And the more she valued herself, the less she tolerated men who didn't treat her well. The more she radiated out that beautiful self that she was. She's smart, she's creative, she's interesting. And she got married last summer to an amazing, amazing guy who loves her dearly. And she stopped making it about her disability and really making it about a connection between two human beings. And so I truly believe, yes, it's challenging. And yes, you can, when you go through that process, you will attract people who will love you for who you are. Rhoberta, what do you think?
Well, I think that's absolutely true, and that's a wonderful story, Sandy, and I'm sure you were invaluable in helping her get to that place. So that's a very good reason for you to hold up that sign that says last first date, because if you want that kind of help, go and talk to Sandy about it, because obviously that's excellent advice. I just want to say something about Mike's particular question here, that people speak to the wheelchair rather than speak to him. I think you're having an issue, Mike, that is similar to many women's issues. And that is that men speak to the boobs rather than to the woman. And sometimes women who have that issue have to say, my eyes are up here. So when people are speaking to your wheelchair, your disability, redirect them and make some fun. Let them know you noticed. And I'm not my disability. I'm Mike, and I'm over here. This is the way it goes.
That's right.
Because just as in Sandy's example, Mike, you're going to have to do the same thing. That you definitely know you're not disabled in any way that matters in a relationship between two human beings getting to know one another. Yes, some people would never get over the wheelchair. I understand that, but those aren't your people. You're looking for someone with an open heart and an open mind, and someone, and let the other ones run up the road. You don't want to engage somebody and guilt them into it, or fault them into it, or shame them into wanting to go out with you. So find the sifting and sorting process that works for you, which is to find somebody who sees and hears you, as opposed to sees a picture that makes them afraid. Because people are afraid of wheelchairs. It is a similar idea of when people go to funerals. They don't know what to say, right? So many people don't go to a funeral. Well, many people don't know what to say to somebody in a wheelchair, so they don't say anything. And you have to teach them, right? Every one of us is 100% responsible for teaching people how to treat us. And when we take that responsibility, we make a huge difference in the potential for our lives.
So well said. And, I had a special needs child. My first child was born with a genetic disease, and people said a lot of stupid things. Not always because they were malicious, but because they were uninformed. And I used to get angry, and then I learned how to speak up and say, I know that you probably had good intention, but can I tell you what would work better for me? So many times in my life, I've used just that statement. I was preparing for my first workshop in coaching, and my mother said, "Don't be nervous." And I said, "You know what? I really appreciate that you're supporting me, but that doesn't help, because I am nervous, and it's okay to be nervous. But can I tell you what would work better would be to say you believe in me."
Right.
So just, we need to train everybody. I train my kids, I train coworkers. We have to let people know they can't read our minds. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is a surprise, isn't it, that none of us are in a relationship with mind readers.
Yes. So let's get back to the control thing, if we can, just to kind of wrap it up, because I'm looking at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We touched on it very lightly and on a few different areas of control. And I think that when these things show up, to not ignore them, I think that's really, really important, that we pay attention, know where you feel it in your body, know how to speak from your own weather report, your own inner weather report, and take a pulse about what's going on for you.
Mm-hmm.
And do we want to talk about any other major red flags of control, just to kind of give some bullet points?
Well, I think one of the ways it shows up in general is somebody keeping a scorecard.
Mm.
When someone says, "Well, you always get your way and you never do what I want," we're in scorecard territory. Or the last 3 times we did what you wanted to do. Now we're not in an equitable relationship. We're not in a partnership where one person is wanting to make the other one wrong, and that's the little whisper of control. Now, of course, you want to respond to it, and you want to think, is that true? And if it is, you can change your behavior. But when we start getting into scorecard territory and tit for tat territory, or even having the thoughts of unfairness and payback and things, that should give us a real eye-opening experience to say, maybe there are control issues here.
Mm-hmm.
And remember what I said, one of my recent blog titles was, "Controlling or being controlled is a direct path to loneliness." So if you're lonely, you might want to look at whether or not you are being controlling. First of all, because you're pushing people away. Other people do not want to be controlled. And that if you have been in relationships where you've been controlled, and so you're lonely because you're afraid to get into another relationship and risk it, then you have to build up your assertiveness skills and know what to do. So either way, when you start to think, am I controlling or am I afraid of being controlled? Both of those things call for introspection, new insights. To your point, Sandy, that we need to align with our values, the ones that we state we have, and maybe we're not demonstrating them. And then we have to work on that from that point. And then we will begin to see that we have a lot of influence in how we behave and how people respond to us.
Mm.
And that we can say no to people who want to control us earlier. And that doesn't mean we're harsh. Remember, we're going to be kind and honest at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And we can simply say something like, that doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel like we made that decision together. Could we talk about that for a minute?
Mm.
Right? And if the person says, "Nope, I'm done with it," just take note. You don't have to put anybody down for the stuff that they're doing. Just notice it and make a decision within yourself.
Yep.
If somebody constantly demonstrates, in my office, on my consulting room wall in 12-inch gold letters, it says the thing that is the most important thing I believe I can teach anyone. And it says, "The truth is what you do." Not what you say you wish you had, or that you meant to, or that you know is a better choice. The truth about you is your behavior.
Yeah.
And the earlier that we all believe that and get in alignment with that, the sooner we're going to have ability to change that will make us draw to us the relationships that we most value.
Yeah, it's funny you said that because you just read my mind. I was just thinking about when words and actions don't match, and I dated somebody who kept telling me he was a good guy. I'm such a good guy. I'm a good guy, and I'm like, your actions do not match that good guy statement.
Right.
And if you have to keep telling people that you're a good guy, there's a little something wrong with that.
Yes,
So
little red flags going.
yeah, exactly. So when somebody says they're a good person and their actions are showing you that they're not treating you well, that they're not honoring and respecting you, that another thing that shows up a lot is people want you to always come to them, always do for them, all that. It's those are all really bad signs. And, pay attention and speak up early. Do not wait. Things don't get better by stifling yourself. That's a big, that's a big fallacy. So we have some
communication is absolutely the key.
Mm-hmm.
Communication within yourself, have enough dialogue within yourself. And then once you've made a decision, and speak it, engage and learn how to be honest and kind at the same time.
Yes. And I teach these skills. You teach these skills. I have a course called How to Talk So Men Will Listen and Listen So Men Will Talk. And I'm in the middle of the course right now. If anybody wants to still join, this week we're actually doing something I call Manscripts, which for women over 40 is a fantastic way for you to actually have the scripts that you can use to speak up when your feelings are hurt, when you want to break up with grace, anything that happens in a relationship that you are at a loss for words. And so you can find me at lastfirstdate.com. And Rhoberta, do you want to give another shout out to how people can find you?
Yeah, for sure. I'll just say there are lots of free resources for you, and you can get in touch with my YouTube channel and all those things at forrelationshiphelp.com. And if you know that you're in a relationship, you're the partner, the ex, the adult child, or the co-worker of a chronically difficult person, I told you I coined the term hijackals. Go and get my free report on how to spot a hijackal to find out if you are with somebody who falls in this category, because you need different strategies if you're with a hijackal. So this has been a great conversation, Sandy. Thanks so much.
It has. This is our first in a series of 5, and join us for more tips on how to not be controlled in dating, how to have healthier relationships. Really excited about this. So thanks.
So next week, same day, Monday at 12:30 Pacific time. And you can always find the replays on Blab or on our respective YouTube channels. So until the next time, make it a great day.
Bye, guys.
Bye.